Toys Go Green. Sustainable choice of material. Dr. Harald Keep of Narocon Consulting in Berlin. He's next to me. I'm really curious what he's got to tell us about sustainable topics. Go Green, Mr. Keep. Hello, everybody. To everybody out there listening and viewing, this is the second talk I'm holding here on the Toys Go Green virtual show, and I brought my fox friend again, the fox who is very nice to geese and ducks, and he doesn't eat them because his belly instead is full of sustainable materials, soft, cuddly fibers from PLA, which is a bio-based plastic. I'll be talking about this in my talk, and I'll be talking about this in more detail to explain what are sustainable materials in the toy industry and how to use them. I was introduced, so very briefly, I've been working with this type of material, and I'm quite deep in these materials, so to speak, and I give advice and also the state, but more in strategic and communicative ways. I give them the major overview of things, and I don't do specific research and development. You'll find that this is not about research and development. We have the products, they are on the market. This fox is from Lithuania. You can buy it if you want, and there's many other examples that I'll show you. What do we do here? I'll very briefly talk about why materials are so important, why they are the key. I will be talking about the circular economy and about circular solutions, very important for higher sustainability in materials. Then we look at plant-based, bio-based materials. It's like looking at renewable energies, and then we go to renewable materials. It's exactly the same idea as in the energy sector. We look at some applications, and then I'll sum up. What's the foundation of all this? This is an image that shows very strongly why today we're all have to deal with sustainability. If I would say it, I would shorten it to climate catastrophe. We have an incredible wall, and we're heading towards this wall. And if we can't succeed in changing our manufacturing and our consuming patterns, this will be the end. We changed our planet. We had a very bad influence on our planet, and it's very threatening to not just it gives us a time frame where we can react, and we have to start reacting very fast. You see it outside. In many countries, you see photovoltaic systems. In many areas, there's discussion about CO2 tax, and petrol is getting more expensive. Yes, we have to go away from a fossil-based economy because it's responsible for this climate change, as we said 10, 20 years ago, and we moved from this climate change to a climate crisis, and if we don't find any solutions fast, it'll be a climate disaster. One graph that everybody knows, you can see the last 150 years, you can see this the global temperature, which has risen by 1.5 degrees, and so we have very little time to get our goals, to limit it to no more than 1.5 degrees. 2 degrees is the upper limit. We have to achieve this in the next 10 years. We have to start this change within the next 10 years, because after that we won't be able to limit it anymore. This is a very big element we are trying to change. We have to go away from oil and gas to renewable energies and energies that come from wind or solar energy. But you have to think that almost half the emissions come directly from the way we consume, the way we live. This means, of course, that materials play an important role. And there's really only two solutions worth mentioning. You have to not use so many materials, and that you have to use materials that produce a lot less CO2 in their manufacture and in their application than we've done so far. So the first area I would like to talk, I'm not really talking about this at the moment, it's a major topic everybody's been thinking about, is the use of renewable energies. Toy fair, toy retail can use these renewable energies. Private households can buy renewable energy and they can accelerate the development of our energy sector. What's more difficult in the area of materials. There we have to save materials. We can do that by, for example, produce products that have a longer life cycle, but we also need renewable materials. Just as with the energy, we need to go away from fossil materials, we have to go to renewable materials. Look at the toy industry. Very briefly, it's supposed to be the most excessive user of plastic compared to other consumer goods sectors. It uses a lot of plastic, and plastic is made from mineral oil, both for its products but also for the packaging and other things. So it's at the same time it's very close to children and young parents, and it's therefore really the ideal choice for driving change. If you look at the importance of oil in the overall emission, the energy area, we can decarbonize the energy sector. We can move to renewable energies for providing electricity. We need carbon in materials. We need it to make the things that we use in everyday life. And if we don't change this to different materials, we'll have less fossil fuels in energy. But the plastics industry will be using an awful lot more. And in 2050, they should have grown to 15% of the entire carbon footprint. So things are happening there that have to be changed so that the image of plastics and you need a lot of plastics in toy products so that we don't get a very negative image change. How can you describe plastics and CO2 emissions? There's for each plastic that's a material that's used in toys, the very different plastics materials are used. There's an eco profile. You can have databases for the life cycle assessment. For example, polyethylene is a very simple material, needs a lot less CO2 in production, or like PET needs a lot more CO2 in production. PE, PP, PT, or PVC. This is a material that's used quite a lot, but ABS, a very long life product. They all have different CO2 emissions. And again, this is an appeal that goes to all who listen and view from the toy sector. It's a huge difference whether a particular plastic, call it PVC or PET or PE, whether it's made from mineral oil, from gas, or from coal, or from renewable materials. The emission, the CO2 emission in the plastics production can differ by a factor of 10. So, for example, you say if a plastic material is made from European raw oil, it has 3 times less CO2 emissions than it's made from coal-based chemistry as it's used in Asia at the moment. And also also extend it in Asia. We can make sustainable plastics all over the world, but we can also produce worse plastics and use worse plastics. You have to do this because the difference is really, we talk about many tons of CO2. The other thing I said was use less and more circularity and more renewable raw materials. If we look at what does a circular economy mean? In past years, we had a lot of negative discussions, particularly about plastics in the environment, pollution of the sea, of the oceans. Microplastics is one other buzzword. They come from plastics not being collected after they've been used, and we lost control, and they ended up whichever way they ended up in the environment. We must monitor the circuit, and we must recycle them. We must collect them. The most important goal today is to take all plastic products, including toys, to make them able to be recycled. You shouldn't use too many different materials in one product. You shouldn't really sort of glue different materials together that can't be recycled separately. You can always get better as a toy manufacturer, and you learn most if you look at packaging industry. Packaging is also used in the toy industry because packaging gets so much pressure from the consumer. They're a factor 10 bigger than the toys, and so the pressure is highest on recyclable products. And this means a change of the way you use the plastics, what kind of plastics you use, more reusable or recycled plastics. But mainly it means that the product design has to be in such a way that it can be part of a circular process. So the instruments we have to do this in the future or force, there are legal instruments that we can have. It can be voluntary. There are plastics pacts in the United States. There's the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that has made major plastics producers to voluntarily commit to change their use of plastics and to use different designs to make their products more recyclable. But legislator can also step on the scene and, for example, levy taxes on products that can't be recycled. It's 800 euro per ton is the plastics tax for non-recyclable packaging plastics. And this, for example, you talk about quota of reuse, of recycled, and there's a whole toolbox, and that will be increased, I'm sure, and also probably be included, extended. We don't have a circular economy. Only about 6% of plastics are part of a circular process. There's many reasons. It's changed by legislation, which has been established, and a circular economy will look this way: that you have products that can be recycled. You design them this way so they are used as long as possible, and then use them again. And at the absolute end of the life cycle, when the product can't be used anymore, then you have a recycling system which can completely make this into another meaningful thing. So if this doesn't always succeed, it's a graph. You have to always put in new products. Recycling is never 100%. You always have to add new plastics. This is the same for paper and for glass. Maybe some cycles for paper and cardboard with metals and with glass. This is, of course, you can do this a lot of times, but it also needs a lot of energy to recycle these. You always have to add new plastics material because and add it into the circle because, of course, so they can be played with. That's another topic. They were safe to play with, and so you have to add more plant-based plastics. This is the use of plastics in the toy industry. On the left-hand side, you have the abbreviations for the standard ones. You've probably heard quite a lot of them before, mainly for toys and for the packaging, PS polystyrol, PP, PE, and so on and so forth. For all of those, for a large part of them, there is a plant-based alternative. One-to-one, technically, it's identical. There's no difference as far as recyclability is concerned. The only difference is that it's made from renewable raw materials. So we can make recyclable plastics from renewable raw materials. This is the current state of affairs in Europe. Which plastics do we recycle? Can we recycle? And we see that mainly PET is recycled. The bottles, PET bottles, drinks bottles are recycled, but also, for example, PE types, certain PE types and foils. And we're not really where we have to be in the future, but there will be massive changes in the future, and I think legislation has really set the conditions for this. What do we learn? The core message is use less material and use it for a longer time. We call it material efficiency. You make the recyclability is the key of all of this. Only if a product can be recycled, it will be part of a circular economy. You can do this by using the right design, and it concerns the product and all the components that you use for this. The use of recycled materials is extremely important, and it's easier for paper and cardboard, for metal and glass, and plastics, because it's used so much in the toy industry. That's a more difficult problem. We have to look at a few solutions there. The next step, the next area that we have a closer look at is the bio-based materials. There is a lot of versions. One-to-one, we can replace the standard plastics. They're not made from fossil fuels or from raw oil, but they're made from renewable raw materials. They can come from agriculture, from biomass or forestry biomass. It could also be waste. You can use wood directly. There's wonderful wooden toys, and the toy industry has been producing wonderful wooden toys for a long time. It's a small niche, but if you can make other toys more sustainable, I have to start looking at plant-based plastics and plastics from recycling. The major advantage is that we have less CO2 than when we use fossil-based plastics. The same graph again. So it's at the moment we have 1 to 2% of plastics production comes from bio-based polymers or so this is only 1 to 2%. We're really at the beginning, but renewable energies also started small, and today they're about 20% market, 20% share, at least in Europe. In some countries, it's even higher. Depends on very strongly on the environment, of course. The more and more renewable energies are being used, and more renewable materials will also be used in the future. The advantage is that at least 50% of CO2 can be saved. You'd have to have a closer look according to the product and material, but it's a major advantage, and of course that's something to look at for the future. If you look at some examples, I call a few, I'm just talking about a few, there's lots of manufacturers. There's the company called Braskem for bio-based PE from sugarcane. There will be more, and the bio-based PE is already used for toy industry. So later on we have a few examples of that. You can also do foam type plastics, also from the same chemical process, from sugarcane or from ethanol, from the bio substance. So anything from flip-flops to other soft mats and so on that are used quite a lot in toys. There's a major portfolio with great benefits. We have an American producer that made the fibers for that fill the belly of this fox. It's a soft fiber. They're called PLA. It's a polyester, but not PET, and it's also biodegradable. And there are 2 plants, one of them in Thailand and one in the United States. They're quite big, 100,000 tons. And also, we have European manufacturers that are producing Asian manufacturers of PLA. It's a very interesting fiber plastic that can replace polyester, but not standard. They have lots of characteristics in common. I can't really talk about that in great detail. You'd really have to look at that in more detail if you want to produce toys. There's another interesting idea that I would just like to sort of sketch for you. I can't give you, but what you can do, basically, you can use bioenergy to use it in chemistry. You don't have to use it in your car. Biofuel as biodiesel. You can transform it very easily into chemical plants, and you can make nearly every product from this. I'll show you a few examples of this, so you know it's possible. We can already do this today. And Nestle is one of the biggest manufacturers of this feedstock for chemistry, biofuel for chemistry. They work together with major plastics producers. You come to bioattributed polystyrol and PVC, or ABS. This is used for very high quality toys, for Lego bricks and so on. So we have possibilities. And we can talk about this for ages. I don't want to do this. I just take a little overview of the topic. There's a possibility of using compounds, making compounds, and you can mix various materials. It's not always recyclable, but they are usually they have a very long life. So, for example, there's a company from Germany. They make compounds and that can be used for various products, and also sell other products. So if you want to find out where you can buy them, there's information channels. For example, the Bioplastics magazine. That's one example that I can show to you. Michael Thiel is one person I work together with him quite a lot, and we talk about progress in the toy industry, about toys that have been made from bioplastics, and give a bit of information about the background. We have possibilities of finding out things, and so everybody can start to use recycled materials and to use bio-based plastic in their toys, or use and also retail these products made from bio-based plastics or recycled plastics. And we have a few wonderful examples in the toy fair. Let's take a few examples. I was at the toy fair. Keyword, we had this categorizing, which I think is very meaningful. We look at products that come from nature, are made from natural materials like cork, rubber, wood. We look at toys, that's the green one, inspired by nature, we changed them a bit. They went through chemical processes, just like plastics. They're not directly found in nature as they are. We look at the topic of toys from circular material, from recycled material. And just from the toy fair, from the website, I brought a few examples. You see, for example, this giraffe, which, for example, is made from natural rubber. You see cork toys, cork building bricks, and go and see this online show. You can look at these toys. We also we have something about the bio-based plastics, background information on the various toys, and so you can look at them. I helped a little bit, and I was very happy to join in with this work, because I think it's really about giving people an overview of the possibilities that exist, so people get to know what's possible, and so you have a choice. Lego is a very positive example in this aspect, not because it's such a great company, it probably is, but they started very early on, they have very good ideas, and they have a very ambitious goal in all their core products, in the products, mainly the bricks. They want to use sustainable materials, but also in the packaging. And I'm not going to go into this in great detail. They have a definition of sustainable material that's about, it has to be long life, it has to be from renewable materials, it has to be recyclable, it should be part of a circular economy. And they have examples in which are already on the market, and this is a really quite a challenging task. This bio-based polyethylene for some products, they're actually experimenting at the moment with the major bricks with recycled PET. At the moment, this could really be a great solution, but at the moment they have still quite a journey ahead of them. Just like other companies like Mattel, major names in the toy trade, and brand names that I can say they're all doing things, but there are also very many little, very innovative companies, probably a little bit further in their development than the giants. Mattel, for example, has similar goals. Hasbro has similar goals. They want to save packaging. They want to use recycled materials. You can look at their goals. Sustainability has already arrived in the toy industry. It's not a topic that's just starting, even though it has to become much bigger in future. Maybe you heard about Dan Toy. This is a Danish manufacturer that is quite far in using bio-based plastics, but also recycling materials. There's many other brands that are already selling toys from renewable raw materials, again bio-based plastics. You could show wonderful wooden toys. You are more familiar with that already. I wanted to show you some of the innovations from the bio-based materials. It's safe. The products have been tested. They fulfill all the norms. They maybe have particularly good characteristics as far as toxicology is concerned. There's many possibilities and many advantages. Another compound, people using wood meal together with bioplastics for toy, and they can be made into very many different toys. This is a great product. It's a very durable toy, and it's a stacking block, and it can be made from recycled materials, and it's really interesting to see what you can do. Another example from this area, from the soft toy, it's about plush, and it's about soft animals, and you have the stuffing for soft animals. You don't have to do polyester. You don't have to use PET. You can use recycled polyester. That's much more, significantly more sustainable, but you could also use different bio-based fiber products. There's quite a few of them, and one of them I already mentioned it, PLA, and it's also biodegradable, so it also has certain advantages if you look at the entire life cycle of these these toys. And if sometimes these things get into the environment. There are also training that can give you information, that can educate you. There are people like me who can give you advice. What can I do if I'm looking for solutions? And then things become a lot more special. This is a Spanish company. We need a lot of knowledge, and we pass it on information portals. There's a German academy for renewable raw materials in German only, for bio-based materials for the toy industry, with lots of background information. They have a social media channel as well, which is really charming, and which will, be much more widespread soon. Social media are really important for the current generation. This is where these ideas need to be presented. You have to explain what is there, what's so special about it, and what is the sustainable aspect of it. For people who look at material design and who look at plastic, the choice of plastics material, they could go to this BioToy conference. The next will be in 2023, in a bit more than a year, and also in Nuremberg. And this is where the plastics industry meets the toy industry in order to look at these materials and talk about them. Just to sum up, I think the toy industry is on a very good way. They are on a good route. They have discovered the topic. They have incredible amount of possibilities. That's the nice thing about it. I showed you from paper to glass, to long life products, to bio-based plastics. Wood is a major material for toys. There's a lot you can do to produce more sustainable toys. Think that it should be recyclable, even if it's used for a long, long time, that it still be recyclable. And if you can put it into recycling circles, and this way you reduce emissions in your company, significantly reduce them. It's really important for the future to do this. Time is running out. We don't have all that much time to protect ourselves against the climate catastrophe. Remember the generation Greta Thunberg and the young parents and the children of today who go and take to the streets, and they will demand different things offered by the toy industry and by retailers, more sustainable solutions which need a lot less CO2 emission. I showed you there are possibilities. There are lots of people who show how you can market this, and there's a lot to be done. Start it, get going. It's a worthwhile topic, and I'm sure that your target group, the children and young parents, but also the grannies of this world who like to buy toys to give away, that they will really, pay you back for this by being more loyal to you and your company and your brand. Thank you very much. This is a graph that I just like to show. In the material sector, we can have major CO2 savings by using less fossil raw materials and more recycled or bio-based raw materials. It will happen. The possibilities are getting better and better. There's a lot of things on offer. Get information, change something in what you know and have always known. For little Moritz, who's 7, 8 years old, I don't know, maybe 6 years old, for him, he needs a world where he can live well, and this must be mainly better for the climate and must not bank on fossil economy. Thank you very much, and enjoy your next information at the Toy Fair.